like as bad as my mom is?
Probably.
Okay, okay. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So it's sold out 3 day, but there's still 1 day.
Well, I don't know.
You mean to eat or? Oh, let them cook. Yeah.
I have two
Yeah.
people under my belt in town,
Yeah, I don't know.
and I don't really want to, but it was kind of a friend in need kind of thing. Yeah.
All I know is we'll be there.
Yeah. But they didn't want to give me stuff. They were going to give me stuff. I'm like,
But it's because, right.
well, and the weird thing is, so she said, that's
Mark, out of the pre-sale building, this is when we go out.
Yeah.
and if you give me
Okay.
Fared better than most.
so then
I said, well, are you gonna get
What do you mean the appearance?
I think the smaller.
Oh, oh. Okay, but even though you're an adult too. Okay, okay.
Maybe they only pre-sale so many.
Last trip she was
Yes, yes.
So we can resell them.
do I still have yours? No.
And I'm allowed to cook my
I
cookies.
think, yeah, Dan tricks that them some.
a what? Rebel? Socialist?
Very important matter.
I think we had to store
Uh-huh.
Chris's dad's stuff, right?
Yeah, they pushed it all to the signing.
And then, yes, yes,
Yeah, it's not a high-end
yes,
shop.
yes.
Like that.
Like what always worked is if my sister and I were fighting in the back seat and it was getting agitated, my mom would like reach her hand, you two need to separate. And then
Baby, do you like
we were friends
spaghetti?
because we were allied against her, but she wasn't meaning, she meant it, like we needed to separate. But then we would say, well, no, we don't,
I don't want food in the fridge because that
Yeah,
doesn't taste
yes,
good.
yes.
In the neighborhood.
So I'm hoping the deed is very
There's a
good.
place across the street. Yeah,
They're just going to give us some flowers. Like the donated back to
Okay, I'm
her.
gonna go say hi to them.
And the way,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
and maybe either she could repurpose it,
No.
or she could, like if she
Is it in the press,
has
maybe?
a show or something, she wants to show her stuff, she could show, so it would be like donating it back to her. And then you could think that day it would see daylight, and maybe she won't be closer. I mean, if it's going to be a burden to her, I don't want it to be that. But I think Joel wanted to repurpose it anyway.
Oh, I see. She wrote a memoir of it. Oh. Oh, I thought you meant it just happened. No, no, no. Oh, yeah.
So when I talked to
Yeah.
her father just died.
Really? Okay, send me a picture. Yeah. Interesting. I didn't know about it, but back then I didn't maybe know what embezzlement was, you know? You were there. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What are you gonna work on? Your file?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael. I'm standing in for Eric tonight. He's the owner and usually the maitre d' and master of ceremonies. But, that position won't be very demanding tonight because we have two extraordinary sensibilities who are going to be in dialogue with one another, which is a departure from the usual format. But I'm very excited. I hadn't been familiar with either of them before looking at their biographical details. And we have, by the way, their books, Reading Jane, which is Susannah's book, and Giving Up the Ghost, which is Samantha's book. And I'll start with Susannah. Your book was from last year, yes? Or?
Yeah, a year and a half ago.
Okay, so a little less. Your book is hot off the press, right?
Yeah.
Hot off the press, yes.
All right, hot off the press. So, Susannah Kennedy is the author of Reading Jane, A Daughter's Memoir, published by Sybelline Press in 2023. And she has quite an array of publishing credits. She was born in India and raised in the U.S., educated at UC Berkeley and Oxford, where she specialized in Arab culture and politics and received her doctorate in social anthropology. Subsequently, she and her husband raised 3 children in a thatched room farmhouse in the countryside outside Hamburg, Germany, which, boy, that sounds romantic. Probably more
It was kind of
than
romantic.
yeah,
It was
well,
nice.
Oh, nice. Great.
Before her mother's suicide and its aftermath brought them back to California in 2017. And Samantha Rose, her new memoir is Giving Up the Ghost, A Daughter's Memoir, published by Sybelline Press. She's an Emmy award-winning television writer and author of The Package, My Not So Glorious Transition from Single Gal to Instant Mom, that premiered on the San Francisco Chronicle bestseller list. She's a New York Times and internationally renowned ghostwriter who collaborates with various and sundry celebrities, experts, entrepreneurs, and so-called industry leaders, whatever that means, who represent a wide category of titles. Again, she's done a lot of remarkable things. She's currently the principal of Yellow Sky Media, a boutique editorial agency in Petaluma, California, where she lives with her son. So it gives me great delight to yield the stage to our 2 participants who will illuminate us about many of the pertinent issues of the day and our own psyches, as it were.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. Can you all hear us? Oh,
Can you hear me too? Yeah? All
these
right.
are tricky mics.
Yeah, well, you let us know if it doesn't work. Thank you, Michael and Bird and Beckett. Everyone, welcome. We're here to talk about Samantha's book, which is an amazing new memoir about a topic that we both wrote about mothers who choose to take their own lives. Giving Up the Ghost, to quote the recent review in the San Francisco Chronicle, is a story about mental illness, suicide, grief, mother-daughter love, and truth-telling. 5 years ago, Samantha's mother, the beloved and accomplished author and Press Democrat columnist Susan Schwartz, made a devastating and irrevocable decision. Reeling from the recent loss of her husband, Susan drove to Bodega Head, one of her favorite spots on the Sonoma coast, and ended her life. In Giving Up the Ghost, Sam recounts the wide-rippling aftermath of her mother's devastating choice, her quest to solve the mystery behind it, and how she called upon her skills as an accomplished ghostwriter to communicate with her mother in the afterlife. True to its title, the book is a ghost story in more ways than one.
Thank
I'm
you.
excited to be here to talk to Sam.
I'm excited to talk to you.
To start off, when I first read the book, when I first read Giving Up the Ghost, I was struck by the very similar story that we have, yet very different details. Our mothers were very different characters. And you had a good relationship, a close relationship with your mother. I had a estranged, kind of fraught one with mine, as an adult anyway. And I wondered if you could talk to that.
I noticed that too, that our stories were similar, but that we had a different relationship and they were different. But the shock and the grief that came after, and the manner in which they died, was so similar. And that struck me because I think when you're going through it, it feels like you're the only one experiencing this. At least that's how I felt. I'd never experienced grief. I had loss in my life, but grief was so new and so all-encompassing, and it felt so personal and private that I couldn't imagine anyone else would experience it. But of course, grief is a collective and shared.
Yeah, I was struck. You did a wonderful job of describing sort of the blow by blow in a way, of what, when after, hearing the news, what happens afterwards. And it shocked me. It really did, that it was so similar to my experience. And I didn't know that at the time.
I didn't either.
Right.
So,
but this is what it is. This
right.
is what grief feels. It's very physical, isn't it?
It's very physical, and it's painful, and it feels like ever present. So I thought I would read a short piece about grief and see if others resonate with how I felt at the time. What was grief anyway? I had been heartbroken, I had been sad, I had been lonely before, but I'd never known grief. Was it an emotion, a condition, a state of being? I'd always regarded it as a nebulous and shapeless thing, and now grief felt like its own presence, so physically heavy, so tangibly near. I felt my grief on me, coursing through me, filling the room. It was both internal and external. It plugged my ears, pressed in on my chest. Wherever I went, it was always there, touching everything. In the space that Mom vacated, grief slipped in. It wasn't a replacement for her, but because it was so insistently present, so intensely painful, it kept her close, within reach, still alive in some way. And this aliveness extended to me. I'd never felt so awake, alert, in my body, and not in the way people in probiotic commercials jump in the air and proclaim, "I feel alive." No, I didn't feel alive in the good way, but rather in the way that there was no hiding, no forgetting the aching hole in my chest, the raw sensitivity of my skin, the understanding that I'd been cut so badly I might never fully heal. My version of grief kept me in a heightened state of physical pain. It forced an acute awareness that wouldn't let me close my eyes. It wouldn't let me unsee. It wouldn't let me unfeel. If ever I started to nod off, it would nudge me awake. Hey, you, I'm here. Look around. Look at me. I'm everywhere. Inside you. Around you. I'm in everything. Does that about sum it up?
Yeah. I mean, it's, I remember feeling nauseous, like I couldn't eat at all, which isn't usually the case with me. And I remember brain fog, and pain. You said sort of physical pain in a weird way, but unexplainable.
So it's this collective shared experience, but I think it doesn't feel that way, perhaps because in our culture, at least in the U.S., I mean, you could speak to other countries, but we don't make space for it.
No.
I think the expectation is to just keep going.
Right.
Yeah.
When I lived in Germany, after somebody had died, you went into any home and they had a candle and a picture of the person, and that went on. There was on a table either a kitchen table or somewhere close, and it remained. They would light the candle every day, and I wasn't used to that, and I thought I learned to really like that part.
Well, I read that most employers afford, if they afford any time at all, bereavement leave, it's 2.5 days.
Yeah.
2.5. I mean, I don't know.
And then people say, are you still grieving? Right.
Right. Do you actually need 3 days?
Yeah.
But my mother passed 3 weeks before the pandemic lockdown in 2020. So the one silver lining, I guess, of that period of time was that I had suddenly a lot of time and space as a writer at home, sharing custody with my ex-husband with one kid. I had a lot of time to grieve in a way that I wouldn't have had we been in normal times. And I didn't quite appreciate it until a little bit later how important that was. That I had this a lot of open-ended hours if I wanted to just give into it.
One sort of, I can imagine, was torn between feeling like there's a lot of time to feel all of that and maybe a little too much time sometimes. At least that was the case for me. And realizing one needs that time, actually.
I think it's essential because it doesn't go away. It just like kind of hides out in your body, I think. And I also describe grief as impatient. It wants an audience, it wants your presence, and if you don't give it, it's just gonna wait you out.
Yeah, and it's going to come back and get you in other surprising ways, right? Yeah. It's interesting because I think that if one doesn't deal with grief, it can often come back as an unexplained depression, for example, right? And that's different from sadness of the grief. The unexplained depression is kind of just I don't understand what's wrong with me, right?
So we both started writing, I think, as a way to grieve. I wasn't conscious of it, but I did start taking notes and journaling as a way to wrestle with what had happened and to try to answer some of the questions left behind with the suicide. It leaves an endless desk drawer of questions. And so I started writing as a way to, I think, work it out.
Did you write every day? Do you remember?
I didn't write every day. But I think that because I'm a writer just by trade, that it felt like a natural way to process. And I've since decided that it's such an important, I think it's important to actively do something, whether that's writing or cooking or exercising or something physical, because I think grief, it takes hold of your nervous system. And like I said, I don't think it doesn't magically lift.
Yeah.
So that was the way I exercised it out of my system, I think.
Yeah. I did too. I definitely didn't know it at the time. Same kind of thing. You write. I was reading my mother's diaries and trying to understand. I think we were both asking that question: why? Right?
Why? How? What did I miss?
Yeah. And I think many people, at least I remember people saying, just go on with your life. Don't worry about it. Leave that in the past. I'm a firm believer, and I'm guessing you are, that it's important to go at something and try to explore it rather than push it to the back.
I think the instinct maybe is to push it to the back because it doesn't feel good, but it started to feel impossible not to write about it. I didn't intend to write a book at first, but then it evolved, and then it felt like the most important thing to do.
And then one of the really compelling characters and interactions in the book, I felt, was your interaction with Rabbi B, right? Who doesn't necessarily have to have been a rabbi. It could have been anybody, but he just happened to have been a rabbi, right?
So he was my grief counselor, and he was recommended by a friend, colleague. It was her brother. And he was such a lifeline. He was exactly the person I needed at that time. And so we started talking on the phone every Wednesday. I was in Petaluma, he was in Denver. And we talked that through that whole first year. So I was going to read about the first phone call with him. He is a good character. Okay. Rabbi Barak Halevi answered on the first ring. My sister said you might call. I'm so glad you did. His familiar greeting disarmed me right away. I'd been nervous as I dialed, unsure how grief counseling worked, and already he pushed clinical weirdness out of the way. You can call me B, or Rabbi B, or whatever you want, really. It's nice to finally meet you, officially, he said with a smile in his voice. I understand your mother has just passed away. I'm sorry for your loss. It was the perfunctory line, the standard platitude. I'm sorry for your loss. But the way Rabbi B said it, I believed he meant it. They weren't empty words. He wasn't performing or reading from a script. As a ghostwriter, I've trained my ear to listen for what's really there or not there, to discern what's underneath or between someone's words. In pitch and tone, in a pregnant pause, or an exaggerated run-on sentence, I hear what's implied, what's withheld, and what I heard from B was no subtext. He was on the level. Finally, I thought, someone who will tell me the truth and allow me to speak mine. So do you want to tell me what happened? He asked. Do you mean tell you how she died? If you can, if you want to. I did. I felt this strongly. I did want to talk about how Mom died without having to skirt around the S word or whisper it, worrying about how it would sound, how it might create discomfort, invite judgment, and deciding ultimately to change the subject because most people would rather not talk about it. She died by suicide, I said. I still hesitated to put suicide and my mother in a sentence together as if they shouldn't touch or occupy the same line. Rabbi B didn't react to this. He didn't flinch or recoil. He didn't change the subject. In fact, he nudged the door open a little more. Do you want to talk about what she did to end her life? I conjured the scene. Mom on the edge of a cliff, the dramatic Pacific coastline below, and the final moment I wasn't there to witness and still couldn't shake. The one that consistently woke me up at 3 a.m. and felt too horrific, too damning to speak out loud. Certainly this man on the other end of the line didn't want to know specifics. I waited, expecting Rabbi B to retract his question once he realized what he'd asked. But he didn't take it back. He sat quietly, allowing the empty space to swell. Well, what she did was pretty awful, I said eventually. Okay. The subtext, I'm not afraid. I can see it. I can hold it. It's okay. With one word, I understood that Rabbi B was grounded in something I wanted for myself, a daring to open the dresser drawer and hold what was dark and painful up to the light. Okay then, I returned, and for the next 15 minutes, I told him all of it, at least as much as I'd had the courage to tell myself up to this point. He listened with a quiet seriousness, not interrupting, permitting my words to wander around in circles until I finally shared what I knew about the final moments of Mom's life. I spoke it all out loud. I let it all bleed into the phone line, and when I was finished, he said, I lost both my grandmother and my father to suicide, and what you're feeling is real, and it's complicated. Suicide is a shattering. It creates chaos and a disruptive void unlike other deaths. It can be very difficult to process, to orient to a new reality when someone is here one moment and then suddenly and surprisingly they are gone. As someone who's been through it, what I can tell you is that it's dark and painful, and for those of us who survive it, it leaves deep cuts and scars. Your challenge is not to cover them up, but to wear them. Your challenge is not to look past or bypass your complicated feelings in an effort to feel better, but to go toward them and feel your deep pain, to be in it. That's where you'll find clarity and meaning and a way forward that redeems your mom's choices. Not right away, but eventually. There can be openings and new beginnings in endings, and finding them is the work.
How do you feel that suicide is different from other kinds of death? It can all be very difficult, but
Well, I just think it's complicated because of what I just read, that it's the suddenness is so shocking, and I think it leaves behind questions that maybe other deaths might not as much. So, I mean, I don't want to rank it in any way, but I think the how and the when and the what ifs that come along with this kind of death take center stage in terms of the grief. Mm-hmm. And there's the wrestling with all that for so long, that the missing of the person, I think, gets pushed to the side until later.
That's nice, yeah. Mm-hmm.
At least that's how it was,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
For me.
Yeah. To me, it feels oft, at least in my mother's case, perhaps in your mother's case, it feels like suicide is an aggressive act.
Mm-hmm.
And it took me a very long time to understand that and to be able to feel. It's not that, if I, for example, in my case, if I come back and lived here, would it have changed things? Mm-hmm. Right? You have all these questions then. And for you, your questions revolved often, I think, around had you been able to identify what was troubling her.
Mm-hmm. There was a resistance to asking and getting preventative help. Mm-hmm. And so I wrestled with that for a long time. And that's why we both wrote books. Who is your rabbi be? Did you have a person? I think it's so important to have at least one person that can go there with you.
I agree. And for me, certainly my husband was my rock in that time. And sort of, I felt unusual, sort of people that I wasn't necessarily close to stepped up all of a sudden in ways that I wouldn't have anticipated. So a friend would come by just randomly and say, hey, I'm going to go to a poetry reading, which I generally wouldn't have done, but she just kind of took me by the hand and said, come with me. And just short, but just, getting out, getting somewhere else, getting some distraction really helped. And it was very kind. Or my neighbor, who I, didn't really understand beforehand, but after this all happened, turned out she was a singer for hospice. And she was one of those people. Not afraid.
Mm-hmm.
You could tell her, you could talk about anything about death, and it didn't bother her. And that was a new experience for me. Mm-hmm. And it was very calming.
I think it's so helpful. Mm-hmm. And I think people are well-intentioned. They just often don't know what to do or what to say. Not just with a suicide, but any kind of loss or hardship. And I think just showing up is enough. And sometimes saying the wrong thing is better. The messy thing, or saying I have no idea what to say is better than not saying anything.
Yeah. I think it's hard, right? I don't know. There's a lot written now about sort of what is the right thing to say to somebody in grief.
Mm-hmm. I don't think there's any one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. In other cultures, you would wear black for a while, and that would indicate to the world something's there's a loss, and then people would interact in maybe a little kinder way for that. But since we don't have any of that in our culture, to sort of indicate, hey, don't come too close, or it's trickier.
I thought about having T-shirts made, or like ball caps.
What would they have said?
I don't know. Like griever, or
I think there should be something like that.
There should be. Actually, I have seen buttons.
I'm in grief.
Yeah. I don't know.
Something. I mean.
Okay. We'll think of it. We'll think of a merch line.
Yeah. I kind of like the dressing in black, except that would also make you sort of an arty New Yorker too.
Right.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about your mom now?
I think that what you touched on, I think had I not written the book and read the diaries, my mother left me diaries, secret diaries, which was my book is about my reading of them to understand her life and my life. Had I not done that, it wouldn't have been as clear as I am now. I wouldn't have been as solid. I think for me, it was the sort of excavation of her life and my own reactions to that, and reflecting upon my life then, in my case, because it was about all my childhood, helped a lot to make me more sort of solid in myself. So nowadays, now I feel that I can actually begin to miss her, like you had said. Whereas I really wouldn't have been able to do that, I don't think, because I was so hurt and so angry and so mixed up in all those feelings. So now I can begin to sort of say, God, she really have liked this. Or now in the politics, she would have been really upset.
My mom would have. She would have lost it. If she didn't lose it earlier, she would have lost it now.
Yeah, and we don't have them anymore to sort of bond about these things, right?
I was in grief, and I was really mad for a long time. And I write about that. I write about being angry, and B helped me a lot with that. And he was one of the only ones to encourage the anger, and thought it was a perfectly reasonable emotion to have. And that was helpful to write it, write down what I was so mad about. And I do think, like I said earlier, that I kind of wrote a lot of that out of my system. Not that I'm not still in grief or miss her or sad or have regret about it all, but I feel just a lot more compassionate now and towards my mom, and some release. So that's great.
You in your book, you have dialogues with your mother, right? And I found that very striking, because when my mother died, after my mother died, she was gone. There was no dreams, no memories, no thinking that she was hanging around. It felt like that was it. It was a hole. So I was struck by, this sort of, I sort of thought maybe it's because you had a better relationship, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, part 2 of the book is takes a pivot turn from part 1, where I start having dreams about my mom, very vivid dreams, and so I start writing those as scenes, and then I start initiating conversations with her in real time, and they take on a life of their own, and I'll leave it to the reader to decide what's happening there. But I think, I mean, I did that because I still wanted to dialogue with her in a way that kept her close and it kept her still with me. But because there were so many unanswered questions, I wanted her to answer them. So that was a reason to do it as well. But then the other reason I think has to do with remembering and wanting to preserve the relationship and actively remember so that I didn't forget. So
Yeah.
I was going to read one more piece about
okay,
that.
Great.
I believe we each are permitted to have our own unique relationship with our dead loved ones, just as we did when they were alive. And the nature of that relationship is not for others to dictate or decide. When Mom was alive, we talked nearly every day. Why should that change now? Why should we end the conversation when there was so much more to say? And especially because of the way she died, there were things we still had to address. Difficult conversations I insisted we have in order for me to make peace with her and with myself. The other compelling reason for continuing our conversation had to do with remembering. I hadn't anticipated what it would mean to lose the person who remembers with you because they share your history. They share your same stories, the beginning, middle, and the end. I couldn't predict what it would mean to lose the person who can recall the other side of the debate, the punchline of the joke, the one person who can fill in the details of a scene in a way that no one else can because they alone were there with you as your witness. Mom and I spent 49 years together. We had a lifetime of memories that belonged solely to us, and if I didn't continue to refresh those memories, I worried I'd lose them. At some point, without her there to remind me, to retell her side of the story, I feared I'd forget the story altogether. So I started having those conversations too, as a way of remembering for us both. Throughout the fall, we dialogued like this, in my dreams, on the page, and also I began to converse with her during my early morning walks around the neighborhood and afterward in the shower. On many days, I'd be in the middle of rinsing my hair, and suddenly a single line, a familiar phrase, back and forth banter would arrive without warning, and I'd jump out of the shower, dripping wet, and run through the house, looking for a pen to write it down before I forgot the whisperings in my ear. And whether I conjured forth these conversations from somewhere unconscious and unseen, between magic and absolutes, or created them in the intersection of memory, longing, and imagination, they felt real to me, and that was all the proof I needed. Proof that I was finally beginning to heal. So I think we can all do this. We can all continue to have conversations and continue the relationship if we want to.
See, I can't do that.
But I think we can.
No, it's a different relationship.
It's different, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for me, it was important because of how close we were to continue it, and but that's up
And
to
also because you're a ghostwriter by profession, right? So you're used to kind of conjuring up something on the page.
Yes,
right.
I am. Yeah, I do this for a living with people though that are still living. So this was a bit different.
Yeah.
but it was similar in that I can hear her voice very clearly, and that's how I do it with clients. Is I talk to them a lot and I listen, and I write in first person as them, and so this was similar in the practice of it.
Yeah, I can see that. You also, a lot of the book is also about your sort of realizing who you are as a woman, right, in this new phase now without a mother, and one of the things I found very compelling was your use of the term ghost when you talked about dating, for example.
Oh, yes.
Right? I thought that was funny. Or not so funny, about having kind of been a little bit of a ghost at your mother's side as a child. And I wonder what that is, if you have a oversized sort of dynamic mother, which I did too. So I could relate to that feeling. And if you're sort of more of an introverted writer type, right, maybe that's common to have that feeling of being in somebody's, like I had the feeling my mother was a lighthouse, and I would always, the light would go around and then I would shine and then the light would,
And I talk about how my mom was this brilliant sun, and I was the moon that orbited her. Well, I started writing about her and her death and our relationship, and then in the writing, as you probably know this too, things start to bubble up to the surface that you didn't necessarily plan to write about, or aren't even conscious. And again, Rabbi B was helpful for always pointing out the obvious, and one of those was how I had become a bit of a ghost in my own life. So not just a ghost writer by profession, but and not because of my mom necessarily, but that I had internalized and externalized this role of ghost and being invisible and stepping back and being the observer and not ever stepping forward into the light, which was my mother loved to do. She was great at it. And so I started to explore this theme of what it means to be a ghost in your own life, and what it means to start to tell a new story about yourself. So that was actually, I had an aha moment there, writing one day, like, oh my God, it's so obvious. And I guess now I'm writing about this, so it has many layers, the title, in terms of, I was also getting a little impatient with being a ghostwriter and always being the voice for other people and not having my own story or using my own voice. So I was flirting around with shelving that role for a while anyway. I'm back at it, but so there was the release of her as a ghost, and also, I guess, releasing myself as a ghost.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one could say in a situation where this dynamic mother then does something like this, you can either, fall apart, I suppose, or sort of begin to blossom and shine in your own right, right? And that seems to be what you've done.
I think that her final act challenged me and my sisters and my family, I hope, to not follow in her footsteps, but to speak up and to talk about difficult things and to be honest and to step forward. All things that an introverted writer type like myself isn't necessarily comfortable with, but this is the hand that they dealt us. And so I have accepted the challenge.
Yeah. definitely. It's been working. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about maybe our writing process. What is your way of writing? Are you a disciplined writer, or are you a sort of fly by the night, stay up late writer?
I'm a really boring writer. I write every day, and I keep like 9 to 3 is when my son gets out of school. So I usually start work before he wakes up. All my sort of most creative time is between 5 and 7 a.m.
Does he like wake you up and then you have breakfast and then?
I wake him up at 7. And then I take him to school, and then I go to an office, and I work all day until I pick him up. I'm disciplined in that way. I don't know. That's not how I've always done it. And I mean, I'll have moments where when I was writing this book, I'd be on a walk, as I mentioned, and things come in, and you try to get home fast enough to write them down before you forget them. But I spend an inordinate amount of time sitting at a desk or standing at a desk. And for me, writing pays off. I mean, the longer you do it, it will deliver. So I'll write for 5-6 hour stretches. I take the weekends off. I used to not, but come on. There's life to live, right?
Does your son write? I'm just curious.
He hates reading. He hates writing. He hates spelling. And I've said, that's okay.
Has he read the book? Is he old enough to read? Not yet, right?
He wanted the first copy, just so he could say when he's ready that it's available to him. But he knew I was working on it the whole time. He's a big character throughout, and he was supportive, and so it hasn't been a secret. But since he's 8 and turns 9 in the book, and he's now 13. So where he was cool about me writing about him when he was 8 or 9, now he's pretty horrified. I think he's afraid to see what's in there. But I think he's charming. He's a charming 8-year-old.
I loved him in the book. I loved the character. Yeah, definitely. I loved your relationship was well put on the paper. Yeah. He was right by my side through all of it. So he and I were in the house together through the pandemic, and he lost somebody too. He was really close with his grandmother. So part of this speaking up and being honest and pulling the veil back, I felt important for him to model that for him. Yeah. I remind him of that now when he doesn't want to tell me anything. He won't even tell me what he eats for lunch. It's like, yeah. Excuse me. Right.
What's your writing process?
Mine? I tend to be a very sort of passionate, spontaneous kind of writer. So I'll be on a walk, and then I'll come home, and then I'll sit down for 2 hours and write something. And when I found the diaries and realized I was eventually going to be reading these diaries, I knew that I had to be disciplined because it would cause havoc in my life otherwise. And he still had our one daughter. We have 3 children, was still at home, and I had to be a normal mother for her. So I would get up every morning at 6, and I would work for 4 or 5 hours, and that was I was very proud of myself because that was not usually the way I am, and it worked. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It works.
It does. Yeah. Let's see. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss?
Okay, let's see if
Should we ask if you have any
questions.
questions from the audience?
Yeah.
I'm a first-time author, and I'm still kind of struggling to find my voice. I'm curious to know, in your ghostwriting world where you are trying to find other people's voices and capture them, like how did that differ from not only writing your own book, but writing about a topic that's so personal? Like in the writing process, you know, do you go back and like revise and say, oh no, that word, I want to change that word, or does it just come like pouring out of you as this is what I felt and this is, and you just capture it directly?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
There's more freedom when you're writing your own story because you get to just write whatever you want. You get to say whatever you want. And when I'm writing for clients, I can't do that. So there was some freedom there that I enjoyed. But because it was my story and it was such a sensitive story, I wanted to get it really right. So I think I was a bit more controlling over the edit. I mean, there's always a lot of editing, but I don't know. I guess it took me longer than other projects because I wanted to really convey it how I felt it. That said, a lot of the passages I wrote as they were happening. I was taking notes on dialogue, and I didn't go back and re-edit a lot of that. And what I read about grief, I try to keep that really true to how I felt at the time. And even now, I mean, I could not write this now because sort of the rawness and the sort of the visceral emotion of it is because I wrote it as it was happening. So I think it is important to write when it strikes you. You may think you'll remember things later or be able to capture a feeling or a scene later, and it does get harder to do. I don't know if that answered your question. But the process of it is similar with ghostwriting and writing your own.
Mm-hmm. I can imagine in the editing process, you know, your editor might say, well, this would sound better this way, and you know, no, but that's not what I felt. I felt this word. Or...
Luckily, I did not have a heavy-handed editor. I was the heaviest-handed editor.
I would say something else to that. My experience, because I wrote about things from the past that weren't my childhood, because my mother was writing about them and I was remembering, is surprisingly that as the practice of sitting with something allowed a lot of detail to come out. So even in my memory, you know, so it doesn't, you know, it's a different kind of description, but it's just as vivid and it felt just as true. So it doesn't, you know, one doesn't always necessarily have to write exactly when things are happening.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah.
Well, you can't always.
Yeah, depends. Yeah.
This question is for both of you. So, what is it? The 5 stages of grief or the 7 stages? There's a codification.
It's 5, yeah.
You know, the stages of grief. Did you experience all of those? And particularly in the case of a suicide, is denial possible?
I think so. I write about this, that I describe the stages as a plate of spaghetti. The predominant feeling I had was rage for quite a while. And so I described rage as the meatball and all the other emotions were the spaghetti. And as much as I wanted to like dip into the others, like denial, or I don't remember what they all are, like it always led back to the meatball for me. But I think they've changed that now, that it's more, grief is explained more like a spinning top, and it can land in all, you know, it can land in a variety of ways, even within an hour or a day. But I think I definitely moved through all of them at different times. It's really fun when you start out the day crying and then you're pissed off and kicking furniture and then you're like in self-loathing and then you go back to anger. It's a great ride.
Yeah. I know. My daughter would come home sometimes and find me in tears, reading something. And then, then the next day would be anger. Yeah. That's, yeah. I wasn't aware of, I didn't worry about that, the 5 stages of grief or anything, you're just in it. It's in your body then. But I can say now that I definitely have an acceptance, so.
Mm-hmm. I think the denial piece goes hand in hand with the shock, where I couldn't understand, how it happened, even though knowing it happened, things like, but I just talked to her. Like, there's no way that could have happened if I had just talked to her. And so I think that the shock and denial are together.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Anybody else?
At the beginning of the dialogue, I heard you talking about the grief as a character,
Mm-hmm.
and I would like you to dig this kind of how it processed to become somebody around you. Could you tell us more about that? How the grief became a character in your life, somebody?
It just was so big and ever present. It felt like somebody in the room. That's just how it felt. It didn't feel like an emotion that was contained. It felt like an entity almost, that was sitting down everywhere I went. I'd sit on the couch and there it was, or I'd go to bed and there it was. That was just how I came to feel it. I mean, I felt it internally, but I also just felt that it was its own force that was taking up space, if that makes sense.
But it was not the suicide, for example, it's the grief.
I think so.
Yeah. You talk about also the grief as a character. You felt that.
I didn't in that sense. I did not know enough about it to understand that it might be a character and to make sense of it that way. I was just raw. Yes.
Anyone else?
I have so many questions. But,
Okay. Front row.
I guess personally, I went through a divorce that happened just a few weeks before the shutdown, and that isolation, not being able to be around friends, and so it really, I felt something large when you talked about that, and it almost sounded like you embraced that, and that it was a positive to you that you had that time, which in retrospect it was also for me, but it was, society changed so much, and dealing with, something so big in your life. So I wonder just a little bit more about that. Like, do you think that was, were you facing that on your own really in that time? Because you were isolated from friends and family and...
Mm-hmm. Well, when it first happened, I had my sisters. I have 2 sisters. One's here tonight, and they're in here, and they were part of the process too, because they were very much affected as well. But we weren't able to see each other, so we agreed not to be physically around each other for a few months, I want to say, until everyone was doing pods, right? And so I did feel a sense of loss when that happened, because my mother was very well known and beloved, and the whole community in Sonoma County was affected by her passing, and we felt, I think, a swell of that beginning when she passed, and that probably would have been really lovely to have and carry us through, and then all of a sudden we had to shut our doors. So I did feel a sense of losing out on that and feeling isolated. And so it went from kind of a big audience, a big world of support, to my son, who, I was trying to help him through this, and my sisters on Zoom, and Rabbi B on the phone. So it went really small. So I think that maybe that's why he was so important, because we didn't have people bringing over casseroles and sitting with us. They couldn't.
Yeah.
We did finally have a memorial. It was about a year and a half later, and that was great. And I think a lot of people acknowledged that they were very happy that we had done that even much later, because they had also kind of had to sit with the shock of it for so long without being able to process with other people.
So do you think now that you have accepted, or how would you describe kind of where you've come to with this, and the anger and the questions, and what can you share without saying too much, or what you don't want to say about the book? But
I am in a different place, and writing the book has really helped. Having to put into words on a page how you feel about things really forces you to face them and get really clear. And so I did that, and now it's 5 years later, and I get to be out here in the world and talking about it. And I mean, what we talked about tonight was, a lot of it was heavy stuff, but there's actually a lot of lightness and humor in the book, and our relationship was really wonderful. So what felt like a kind of a suicide book for me in the beginning, I think more now as a love story between her and I, and between my son and I and my sisters, and it feels different, even though the details of what happened have not changed.
That's a lovely way to maybe just wrap it up, unless somebody else has a question. No? Yeah.
I want to thank you both for sharing your stories, and I know that through my own grief, also related to suicide, and unfortunately 2 other people were killed in the process. And what I wanted to say is, I really crave to find people that had a similar situation to me. So I read a lot of books on suicide and various other things to try and help me cope with that, and I think it's beautiful what you guys have done, and thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's so important to be able to talk about it.
And I kept saying, shortly after my mother took her life, so many people would come up to me and say, "Oh, my mother did too," and I was shocked. Like, what? Excuse me. And it turns out most of us have, or many of us have, close people or friends that have taken their lives, and we should talk more about it, for sure. Yeah, so it's not such a shock then to those who are left behind.
Thank you all for listening and being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
forget, Samantha and Susannah both have many copies of the books available for sale. And, yeah.
And we can sign them.
Yeah, and they can be signed as well, so don't dare try to leave without buying. Yeah. No, thank you so much. So
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very, very welcome.
I thought your question was about it being a character. And what it made me think about is something I've learned over the last 5 years is, we all have a voice in our